Welcome to the BankTalk podcast, the show where we talk to leaders and experts from the community banking sector. Whether you are a current CEO or aspire to be one, this podcast will give you valuable insights and advice on how to run your financial institution better. Each episode features a different topic and a guest who shares their experience and knowledge with us. Tune in and learn something new with BankTalk podcast.
Hello, welcome to Bank Talk. I'm your host, Rich Carty, Sales Executive with Remedy Consulting. Today in our episode, we'll sit down with Jason Mork, Director at Piper Sandler. He has over 27 years in the banking industry, and he'll talk through his experiences with Graduate School of Banking as a perspective as a student, as a faculty member. We'll kick it off from there. Hopefully you enjoy.
Good morning.
Hey, Jason, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, why don't you kick off and tell us a little bit about yourself and what we want to dive into today?
Sure thing. As you just mentioned, I'm a director with Piper Sandler, and I specialize in working with depositories. I'm part of that team. I'm on the fixed income side, but in the realm of what I do here at Piper Sandler, I'm part of a bigger team that touches all sides of banking. So as a result, you have to know all sides of banking. So it is a great place to be from that point of view. I'm just not siloed into fixed income, even though that's my primary responsibility. And as you mentioned, I've been in banking for 27 years. I actually started out as a teller when I was in college and have worked my way up. I've worked in bank call centers, done personal banking, commercial banking. I've been a credit analyst. So I've really had the opportunity throughout my career to see a lot of sides of banks, which has helped me as I work primarily with banks on the consulting side now. And in the other thing that I like to pursue, which is I'm a faculty member with the Graduate School of Banking. And that's one of the places where I have a great opportunity to give back. I received a lot of help from people over the years, a lot of education from people taking their time out. And for me, it's great to be able to give back. I'm able to teach both at the general school session, which is part of a 25-month program where big groups of students, over 300, come out for 2 weeks at a time to Boulder, Colorado, where I'm at the University of Colorado. I also teach at the Community Bank Performance Institute, which is one of their specialized programs. That program's dedicated more to balance sheet understanding, ALM topics, investments, liquidity, and how everything fits together in terms of optimizing how a bank runs. So those are two different schools I'm directly involved in.
Awesome. That's great that you're giving back. How long have you been faculty at the school?
I started actually speaking back in 2011 at some of their seminars. And then I want to say I started at what was the predecessor to the Community Bank Performance Institute in 2017, 2018, somewhere in that ballpark. And then I started with the general session in 2020.
Awesome. And from what I understand, the graduate schools are set up for someone within the banking world that's looking to further their career, become more and find a leadership role within that bank. If you can touch upon that a little bit more, of who might attend, and you mentioned there's 300 at a time. Is there something more geared towards financials or technology, or what's the mix like?
Sure. So I'll say the general school program, the large one, is geared at anyone who is looking to move up within their bank or who has been identified to maybe be a future leader or future manager, department head, anything from we have future CEOs in there to, someone who might be the head of lending or, as you mentioned, head of marketing, head of IT, who really just needs to understand from a high level how all the pieces fit together in a bank. I actually had the opportunity to go through a bank training program from a larger bank, and it was great, but I'll say it was very siloed, right? It was a credit and lending focused program. So they called it a management training program, but what I was really learning to do was to go out and be a lender. And so I learned all the pieces that touched lending, but not the rest of the bank. Where this program, especially for community banks, where lots of times you're going to have to wear several hats, you get to learn how all the different pieces fit together. And as you mentioned, as a result, there are some specialized schools that are aside from the general program. So there's executive development schools that are specifically focused on someone who might be the next CEO or CFO. There's marketing schools. There's IT schools. As I said, I work at the Community Bank Performance Institute as well, where we're working with anyone who might be in a treasury or CFO type position, or Even sometimes we have people who are CEOs who want to know more, or board members coming through who want to understand the finance function a little more. But the 25-month, the big program is kind of like the crown jewel of it all that everyone, I won't say everyone goes through, but a lot of people go through. It's a great fraternity when you get out in the world. So many people, when you bump into them, have gone through one of those programs. And it's regardless of which one of I believe there's about 6 schools that have them. They all have, to a degree, parallels in the experience. And everyone who went to one can talk to someone who went to a different one and have something in common and understand their background.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was going to ask you how many there are. So there's 6, obviously, that's great that people have the option. And I know what we talked briefly beforehand. My experience in the sales world, I still fall back on some people I met at certain sales trainings. And, just as much as you're learning at that time, the network is obviously a beneficial and great place to kind of, circle ideas and so forth.
Yeah, the network's huge. I actually, as part of a class I teach, I like to give out a little survey, and there's 2 things going out in that survey. One is I ask them a bunch of random questions just to know who they are, what their background is, what their experience. It's actually a class on negotiations that I teach. So I want to know their background. I have a couple questions that fit into the class where they're more random questions that I teach them a lesson about something that I can't give away in the podcast because it will skew them. But I end with, what was your favorite experience? And then I always take these surveys when I'm done using them for academic purposes and give them to the school, which they love. And the networking is always the predominant theme of what students found most valuable, because I'm working with third-year students who are about to be done. So it's always a challenge working with adults who are there to learn and they're done in a week, capturing their attention and focus. We do a good job of it, but it's always a different experience versus, say, a first-year student who feels like they have a very long road ahead of them. They have a very different perspective. So I enjoy working with those third-year students. But yeah, that networking is consistently the number one thing that I hear back from them about what their favorite part of going to graduate school of banking was.
Well, obviously you're faculty now, but before that you were a student of the program as well. If you were to look back at that, is there something you might maybe do differently, or maybe have some advice for someone that's coming into the program?
Sure thing. Yeah, I had the opportunity. I did my first year at the Graduate School of Banking in Madison, pretty close to my home. And then I did years 2 and 3 at the Graduate School of Banking in Colorado, as I had the opportunity to build a relationship with the president at the time, who's a friend and a mentor, Tim Koch. He had me speaking at some conferences, as I mentioned. And I said, well, hey, if you're nice enough to have me speak at some of your conferences, I should come to your school. But to your specific question there, I would say that looking back at me, I did as part of a broader course of study for an MBA program. And so I was a pretty serious student at school. I do a little more networking after 5 o'clock than I did. So I'll say I was one of the people who was a little more of a serious student there and aware of the other things I had going on in life. So I didn't stay out till 2 a.m. very much, where a lot of my peers stayed out till like bar time frequently. And to your point, there's some great networking done out there. So I probably would tell myself, have a little more fun, stay out a little later, but not too late, but just do a little more of that fun networking. On the flip side, advice to other students, the opportunity I see is, what I mentioned, what I did, like anything, there's good balance in things. There's a number of MBA programs that are affiliated with a number of the Graduate School of Banking programs. I think there's a great opportunity there to turn it into something bigger. There's no such thing as a MBA in banking per se, but that's nice where I graduated from the University of South Carolina, and they called it a banking track in their MBA program, where I actually got credits for electives from going to banking school, and it tied into it. So from that point of view, I think there's an opportunity there that I see. It's probably one of the things not a lot of students, some take advantage, but there's probably a lot more students who could take advantage of what they could turn it into.
Sure. And for the programs, is this something that people are paying for themselves? The banks are covering how, their scholarships? What does that typically look like for a student?
Yeah, I'll say for 95% of students, their banks are sending them there and the banks are paying for it. There are definitely scholarship programs out there, as different students. Like I said, some people are coming in from different parts of academia coming through. I've even seen some programs that have had international students coming over, which is great to add, not just a nationwide mix of students, but now you're getting a worldwide mix of students. So I don't know the specific programs, but I can say, yeah, there's definitely scholarship opportunities for different people who are interested. If they would look up some of these banking schools, they're all on their websites. But your average student is coming, again, their bank sending them there as kind of a training program. And a lot of them are coming from smaller community banks that might not have a formal training program. But that's not to say the larger banks don't also send their students there. Most of the big bank training programs aren't around anymore. And programs like these, I think because of their academic relationship with a university and the certificate you get and how you build your resume being nationally recognized is a really valuable thing for people from banks of all sizes.
Gotcha. So Jason, tell me, are there any other like graduate programs that might be more specialized or anything else and that would be more geared towards a certain role if someone was looking to do that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of programs out there dedicated for bankers. There's always different programs being put on by vendors, for example. And there's some very good programs offered by vendors, but one of the challenges there always is the vendor trying to sell you a product, right? One of the things that I think the reason there's 6 different banking schools and the reason we've got into so many other specialty programs, as I mentioned, the Community Bank Performance Institute, for example, that I'm part of, there's a big thing is obviously I work for Piper Sandler. And people know where I work and what I do, but I don't directly solicit anyone who is in my class as a client. That's kind of a rule we sign out. Surely anyone who sits through one of my classes who would like to follow up with me is welcome to give me a call. But it's that one-way relationship where I think that's why the banking schools have heard back from the students. And again, there's a board of trustees and a board of directors, and there's former students who serve as advisors, and they're out there telling about what the needs of the banking community are. And we're, always developing those specialized programs because I think people really like the academic relationship and that responsibility that comes with it being academic versus kind of a sales sort of thing. So those would be the closest things, but that's why we're always evolving to meet those needs.
I don't know if you know the stat off the top of your head, but how many people are actually applying to go to one of these graduate schools, and what's like the acceptance rate? Is it like you apply, you're automatically in, or they got to look through and they can only take a certain amount?
I'll say post-COVID, banking schools are full. At least I can speak to Graduate School of Banking Colorado, where I'm affiliated. We are maxed out by nature of how many seats we have in classrooms.
Sure.
It seems to be a huge demand to be in person studying with people, especially since, we went through the whole work from home, working remotely thing. People really want to be in person. And we learned through that experience that we did the best we could. We had to teach virtual, or we had a hybrid option one year. It was far from the same of being out there in person. And students completely agree with that, where I think in other areas of their life, they're like, yeah, I want to be virtual. This is one of the things people don't want to be virtual. The requirements, there's a list of requirements for bankers. So I'll say anyone who meets the requirements, to my knowledge, generally is accepted. So it's all on those websites. I don't think it's too difficult to get into for anyone who's there for the right reasons and is coming to learn. It's a very inclusive environment where, they want to bring a lot of different bankers with different backgrounds in. So, but again, like anything, there's some requirements. And as I said, the good news for Graduate School of Banking right now is the demand's there and the seats are full.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Well, what else is trending? Obviously, they're full classes. So what else is trending in that world? Compared COVID aside, compared to 10 years ago, is obviously it seems pretty popular.
Great question. I can tell you, at Graduate School of Banking Colorado, the board of trustees is always questioning, what are we doing? How does it fit into banking? And how is it training that next generation of leaders? I can tell you it's not just the trustees and the board. It's also, I can tell, in the management and the president, Mike Stevens. He's always going through the classes and saying, how does this class fit in? How is it relevant to banking? And going to the students and saying, what else do you need to learn? And looking at what electives are offered or the format in somehow classes are being taught to make sure they're meeting the needs. So there's this constant interaction going on between what's going on on the ground and what's going on in the classroom. And I think that's been a big evolution, say, to your question, versus 10, 20 years ago. These banking schools have a long history and go back 70 plus years. But I think there's probably some large periods of time where you probably could go back 10 years later and the classes were relatively similar, where, to your point, with technology competition, things like people wanting to know more about blockchain. That's had to be incorporated into classes. And AI, like both is how can you use AI, but what are the concerns about bringing AI into a banking environment from an IT security point of view? Those are just some current topics off the top of my head where there's been a lot of conversation about how do we get the right topics at the right time in front of the right people.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. Obviously, the world's changing day by day, and you guys seem to be keeping up with that. So I think that was most of the questions I wanted to ask Jason. Is there anything else that I missed or anything else that you think would be beneficial to the listeners today to hear?
Yeah, I think the only thing we didn't touch on that's worth mentioning here for anyone who is either running a bank and thinking, well, why this might be a compelling thing to send their bankers to, or someone listening who says, hey, well, this sounds interesting. Why else would I want to go to one of these banking schools? And I'll say most of these schools end with an experience called Bank Sim. And again, at Colorado, I can tell you that was kind of the capstone of what we did after, call it 25 months of learning. Was Bank Sim is an experience for third-year students where you get together, you spend several hours a day running a virtual bank, and every day you make quarterly decisions, and then you get back the quarterly results. You have to name your bank. You work with a team of peers. You have to decide on roles. So all of a sudden you're taking this knowledge. And again, I mentioned banking school. One of the differences between banking school and a training program per se is you learn how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Now you got to build a team, work together as a team, figure out who's going to take on what role, and then figure out how those functions work with each other in a virtual environment. And it's actually done in a competitive way where you're competing against a number of other virtual banks in the market. So you're all in a room, you're all running your virtual banks, and then you start to learn that in banking, you exist in a market, and that market has a finite amount of deposits per se, or a finite amount of loans. And what type of decisions you make in your market determines how your mix of funding is going to be and how your loans and how do you plug the different figures. And that textbook banks don't really exist too much in the wild. And that's great real life. I mean, I use Bank Sim experience working with my clients all the time. I actually have clients who have gone through Bank Sim and they'll ask me a question. Oh, they remember in Bank Sim when we had this happen, then we did this. It's that good of training that it actually really, really hits home with meaningful lessons. Because I think one of the challenges of, I'll call it regular academia, going back to say going to graduate school and taking a banking class, is that's a textbook world. And it's like, well, in a perfect textbook world, you'd like this percent of funding and this percent in loans and this percent in liquidity, and you can build this perfect textbook bank. But in the real world, you don't have those pieces available to you in your market. So that's where you have to learn to work with what you have and then figure out how can you get the other pieces to plug it in. I'd say behind the networking, a lot of students, like, what do they talk about when they're gone? Bank Sim. And some people like me still complain like 15 years later that they didn't win and they came in second place. So that's how much it hits home with a lot of people, is everyone remembers that experience. And it's a great capstone to the 25-month experience.
That's great. Yeah. Something to be applicable like that. I don't know if my Latin class translated too well here for me in my own career, but that's really interesting. Well, Jason, I want to thank you again for the time today. It's great to learn a little bit more about that. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk about this today. So thank you for having me.
Well, thanks everyone for listening and tuning in today. Have a wonderful day. Keep on learning. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Bank Talk podcast, brought to you by Remedy Consulting. To reach out to Jason Mork, email him at jason.mork, M-O-R-K, @psc.com. Once again, jason.mork@psc.com. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and share our work with others. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.